Hello, welcome to Planetside Chats, a video cast about vintage science fiction. I'm your host, Will Emmons, and we're going to be talking about two stories today, Jonah of the Jove-Run by Ray Bradbury and The Deserter by William Tenn. Let's dive right in. Jonah of the Jove-Run was first published in Planet Stories, spring 1948, when the magazine was edited by Paul L. Payne. It's a story about a washed-up elderly spaceman named Nibley who has the special power of tracking orbits. Despite this power, Nibley's disgraced because he has a reputation as a drunk. He's hanging out in Marsport watching some Earth colonists load their ship for Jupiter. They're waiting on a backup computer to track asteroids so they can make it safely through the belt. Nibley senses a crash way out over the Dead Sea bottoms. The Martians have shot down the repair rocket with the backup computer because they have competing colonial claims on Jupiter. Since the backup computer isn't coming, Nibley convinces Captain Kroll to bring him along because of his special power to track orbits. He can be a sort of human backup computer. The astrogator Douglas does not like it. I want to share some of Ray Bradbury's actual prose with y'all when Nibley gets aboard the ship. This kind of describes how his powers work. He felt all of the ship's men around him. Vague, warm electrical stirrings of fear, hope, dismay, exhaustion. All their orbits coming into a parallel trajectory now, all in the same path with him. And the asteroids smashed down with an increasing swiftness. In a very few hours, the main body of missiles would be encountered. Then it gets into some foreshadowing. Now, as he stared into space, he felt a dark orbit coming into conjunction with his own. It was an unpleasant orbit, one that touched him with fear. It drew closer. It was dark. It was very close now. And so when it says that, this guy named Bruno enters, and it's a little bit like the song "We Don't Talk About Bruno." We don't want this Bruno guy around. He's there to try to coax Nibley into abandoning his post to play Martian chess. Nibley declines because he isn't allowed to leave the deck, plus he always wins at chess because of his powers. Bruno leaves, but Nibley says his orbit will bring him back. Later, Nibley gets lonely and against orders goes downstairs to have a meal with the crew. The captain allows him to stay just this once. I'll share some prose from that scene. Bruno cut a piece of meat. "What's your business now, Gramps?" "Finding out where things is going," evaded Nibley. Kroll snapped his gaze at Nibley. The old man hurried on. "Why, I know where the whole blamed universe is heading." Everybody looked up from their eating. "But you wouldn't believe me if I told you," laughed the old man. Somebody whistled. Others chuckled. Kroll relaxed. Bruno scowled. Nibley continued. "It's a feeling. You can't describe stars to a blind man, or God to anybody. Why, hell's bells, lads. If I wanted, I could write a formula on paper, and if you worked it out in your mind, you'd drop dead of symbol poison." At this point, the crew breaks out the wine, and of course, Nibley, being an alcoholic, really likes wine, but he doesn't want anything to do with it, so he goes back upstairs. Unfortunately, somebody has left some wine out for him upstairs, and he can't resist it. So he gets drunk and starts to feel really sorry for himself, like the people aren't taking his special power very seriously, because they're currently relying on the ship's computer to get them through the asteroids. They don't have a backup computer, but their main computer is still working. So he decides that he's going to take matters into his own hands and smash the machines so that they have to rely on his powers. I have a note here that it says Nibley as Luddite. The machine has put him out of work, and so he's going to get his revenge on it. Once Nibley is discovered and everybody knows the machine is broken, everyone still wants to press ahead except for Bruno. And that's because Bruno is a Martian agent. And we find this out in a scene where Bruno is trying to bring things down. And I want to share that scene with you. Darkness, a short circuit. Feet running on the metal deck. A shout, a thread of fire across the darkness. Then a whistling as something flew, hit, someone grunted. The lights came on again. Nibley was at the light control. On the floor, gun in hand, eyes beginning to numb, lay Bruno. He lifted the gun, fired it. The bullet hit Nibley in the stomach. Nibley grabbed at the pain. Kroll kicked at Bruno's head. Bruno's head snapped back. He lay quietly. Blood pulsed out between Nibley's fingers. He watched it with interest, grinning with pain. I knew his orbit, he whispered, sitting down cross-legged on the deck. When the lights went out, I chose my own orbit back to the light switch. I knew where Bruno'd be in the dark. Having a wrench handy, I let fly, choosing my arc, naturally. Guess he's got a hard skull, though. So, Nibley is bleeding out and has 2 hours or less to live. He writes a short note for Bruno. Then he has the colonists leave him on an asteroid to calculate the ship's course while he dies. He directs the ship from the asteroid, winning Astrogator Douglas's approval. And he's talking to them on the radio. And Douglas lets him know, we just gave Bruno your little note to read, whatever it was. When he finished reading it, he went insane. Nibley said, quiet-like, burn that there paper. Don't let anybody else read it. A pause. It's burnt. What was it? Don't be inquisitive, snapped the old man. Maybe I proved to Bruno that he didn't really exist. To hell with it. Soon Nibley is no longer able to speak. And at this point, Ray Bradbury writes, life and death were the parabolic ends of his trajectory. The long life, first swinging in from darkness, arcing to the inevitable perihelion, and now moving back out and away, into the soft, encompassing dark. By God, he thought, weakly, quietly, right up to the last, my reputation's good. Never fluked a calculation yet, and I never will. He didn't. So, that's the story. There was a proposition made at Pulp Fest last week during the Planet Fitch Stories panel and in the pages of the Visiograph that Ray Bradbury doesn't have faith in humanity. Oh, what do you think? Is Jonah of the Jove-Run a pessimistic story? On the one hand, our guy dies. He's a Jonah that has to be let out of the ship for it to succeed. But on the other hand, he's an old man, and he gets what he wants. So I don't really know if the story is pessimistic or not. I know that I liked it a lot. I also think maybe America craved a pessimistic voice in the post-Hiroshima moment. And that's why Ray Bradbury was so popular. He kind of got something dark that was in the zeitgeist. So moving on to William Tenn, which is the nom de plume of a guy named Philip Glass. Before we dive into this story, I think it's interesting to note why William Tenn liked to write stories about aliens. In 2001, he wrote that within the next 50 years we could encounter aliens, which I thought is pretty idiosyncratic reason to write about aliens. He's trying to inform the public about what these encounters might be like, prepare us culturally, intellectually, etc. for first contact. And I think that's really an interesting reason to write stories with aliens in them. So let's dive into this story, The Deserter. It first appeared in Frederick Pohl's anthology Star Science Fiction Stories in 1953. The backdrop is that Earth and Jupiter have been at war for 18 years, and for the first time a Jovian has been captured alive. The Jovians are giant. They breathe methane and drink ammonia. They're about the size of a city block. It's a very different kind of alien, and they have to be kept in this, big tank to survive in this underground cave. Up to a point, this story is the story of two men rather than a man and an alien, or a story about two kinds of men. And those men are a guy named Martin, who's a PhD in Martian archaeology. He was captured and interrogated by the Jovians using a harsh telepathy machine 18 years ago, and since that time he's been kept on ice as a fairly incompetent military intelligence officer, owing to his expertise with the Jovians. And then there's this guy Billingsley, who's the marshal of space, quote-unquote old rocket head. He rescued human colonists on Mars 18 years ago, including Marden. They call him the Defender of Luna, the father of the Fortress satellite system. He's a major war hero. However, previously he committed genocide on Venus against this race called the Grigadin. They're an insect race that was basically annoying the colonists by asking them a lot of questions in shrill voices and keeping them awake at night. So they had to die. But for the war with Jupiter, Marden would be a competent academic, and Billingsley would be remembered as the Beast of Venus. And Billingsley comments to Marden how lucky Marden is that war has submitted him to military discipline. So we have this picture of two men contrasted. One has thrived due to war, the other has suffered. Marden is scared of the telepathic interface because of what it was like last time. The Jovians ripped thoughts out of his head and dissected them. This time is different, though. The connection is more pleasant, and the feeling is reciprocated by the Jovian. It's pleasant to connect with you too. So Billingsley has Marden start things out in a properly military way and ask for the name, rank, and serial number of this alien, which is of course absurd. And I just want to share with you what the response to that inquiry was. Abruptly, he, Marden, found himself on the bottom of a noisy sea of liquid ammonia, clustered with dozens of other newborn around the neuter mother. Someone flaked off the cluster and darted away. He followed. The two of them met in the appointed place of crystallization and joined into one individual. The pride he felt in the increase of self was worth every bit of effort. Then he was humping along a painful surface. He was much larger now, and increased in self many times over. The Council of Unborn asked him for his choice. He chose to become a male. He was directed to a new fraternity. Later, there was a mating with tiny silent females and enormous, highly active neuters. He was given many presents. Much later, there was a songfest in a dripping cavern that was interrupted by a battle scene with rebellious slaves on one of Saturn's moons. With a great regret, he seemed to go into suspended animation for a number of years. Wounded? Marden wondered. Hospitalized? In conclusion, there was a guided tour of an undersea hatchery, which terminated in a colorful earthquake. Marden slowly assimilated the information in terms of human symbology, and so he has to get through all of that to get to the name, rank, and serial number. "Here it is, sir," he said at last, hesitatingly, into the mouthpiece. "They don't have any actual equivalents in this area, but you might call him Hopar the 15th, originally of the Titan garrison, and sometime adjutant to the commanders of Ganymede." Marden paused a moment before going on. "He'd like it on the record that he's been invited to reproduce 5 times, and twice in public." And so Billingsley is really curious why this guy has deserted. He thinks that the Jovians are really good soldiers and would never desert, and so he just wants to know what's up with this. So Marden goes in again. Once more, he wandered on worlds where he could not have lived for a moment. He superintended a work detail of strange dust motes, long ago conquered and placed under Jovian hegemony. He found himself feeling about them the way he felt about the Grigadun, 18 years ago. They were too wonderful to be doomed. He protested. Then he realized that the protest was not his, but that of the sorrowing entity who had lived these experiences. And they went on to other garrisons, other duties. So Marden goes on to explain that this Jovian and 4 other Jovians that came to Earth together were all trying to desert, but the other 4 were killed in the process. And the reason that they were deserting is they're opposed to militarism. And that really freaks out this Marshal of Space, who just can't conceive that these monsters would be opposed to militarism. or he can't conceive that any being would be opposed to militarism. That's like his whole self. Um, and he's like, and so Martin goes on, that, as near as I can render it, is exactly what he says. He says that militarism is ruining their race. It has resulted in all kinds of incorrect choices on the part of the young as to which sex they will assume in the adult state. I don't understand that part at all myself, sir. It has thrown confusion into an art somewhere between cartography and horticulture that Hopar thinks is very important to the future of Jupiter, and it has weighed every Jovian down with an immense burden of guilt because of what their armies and military administration have done to life forms on Ganymede, Titan, and Europa, not to mention the half-sentient bubbles of the Saturnian core. So then Hopar reveals what he's come to Earth for, and he's got information about a new weapon that the humans will be able to produce faster than the Jovians will if they get a hold of it. And it's the basically the only hope for the humans to break Jovian hegemony in the solar system. And so he outlines the weapon. Billingsley gets it, and then he senses something in Martin, some misgiving that Martin has about Billingsley and this whole affair, and he opens up to Hopar opens up to Martin and is like, I consider you a blood brother now. Will you tell me what kind of man I've just given this weapon to? And so he does, and Hopar opens up his spacesuit to die, and he kills Martin in the process with all the methane that comes out. And I found it to be a very touching and poignant story. Almost all of Tenn's alien stories end in the death of the human making contact, so that's no exception here. There was one exception that I read where the story ended in the death of the alien instead. But I think it's really interesting that Tenn is trying to prepare us for first contact, but his aliens are very human. The Jovians are portrayed as being just like Billingsley and the human militarists. In fact, this story was written in honor of William Tenn's father, who I want to share a little bit about that. This is from a 2001 afterword. The deserter is by way of being a small monument to my father, Aaron David Class, who was a minor Socialist Party official in the England of 1914, when all the socialist parties of Europe dishonored their pre-1914 pledges to call an international general strike and never vote for war credits in case of war. My father took it upon his 5'2" self to right the balance. He published signed manifestos declaring that his conscience would not let him do other than publicly desert if he were drafted. He urged all other working men to do the same. He was drafted. He publicly deserted. He was found and brought back in chains for a court-martial. After escaping through the help of rank-and-file socialists who also had been drafted and who had attended his lectures, he spent the balance of the war in a windowless attic, writing highly subversive pacifist pamphlets. He eventually fled to the United States, entering it as an illegal alien, a status that was not changed until 1945, when his son was drafted for another war. Heavy stuff. Heavy stuff. And interesting that the aliens are kind of thought about in the same light as we humans in William Tenn stuff. Anyway, that's our show for today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I really encourage you to seek out these stories and read them. They're great stuff. Our first story, Jonah of the Jove-Run, is in the public domain. It's available on Project Gutenberg, and you can find William Tenn's writings in this book, Immodest Proposals, which is a collection of his short fiction. He only really wrote short fiction. He's like Borges. have a great day.